My name is John Viehe. Welcome to Chautauqua People. My guest today is Caroline Van Kirk Bissell, the Chautauqua Bat Lady. Caroline, where did you spend your childhood?
Well, in McKeesport, Pennsylvania, and in Chautauqua during the summers.
How did you find your way to Chautauqua?
Well, my relatives were renting there, and then after they were renting, we decided that that was a pretty cool place to hang out, and we ended up buying our house in 1949.
Okay. And what did you do as a child at Chautauqua, as a young adult?
Boys and Girls Club. We lived there from 9 to 12 and 2 to 4 in the afternoon, and learned all kinds of sports, learned swimming, went all the way through club, all the way to being a counselor, and then I ended up teaching swimming and canoeing on waterfront,
Right.
which I loved.
And how long did you work on the waterfront?
Probably 3 years.
And while you were working here, were you going to college?
Yes.
And where did you go to college?
Lake Erie College for Women in Painesville, Ohio, where I had a winter term abroad in Valencia, Spain, which was awesome.
Right. And do you speak Spanish?
I do.
Good.
And
good.
living in Arizona, it really comes in handy.
You bet, you bet. Now, have you done any graduate work?
Yes, I did graduate work at ASU in interpersonal communication.
And ASU is Arizona State.
Yes, it
And
is.
if you're down in my place in North Carolina, ASU is Appalachian State.
Oh, so sorry.
Not a problem, not a problem. Now, how did you become interested in bats?
Well, I grew up at Chautauqua, and so those of us that grew up there became very comfortable with bats. We saw them regularly. When we would be riding our bikes at night, the bats would come zooming by our faces, and we just took it for granted. And so I've always had an appreciation for bats. And when the naturalist retired from the Bird Tree and Garden Club in 1999, they asked me if I would consider doing the bat chats. And I said, yeah, that would be kind of fun. So I started doing them in the year 2000.
Okay, so you've had lots of experience now with bat chats.
Yes.
How many types of bats are there in the world?
1,300 and counting.
And counting.
Every year a new one is discovered, so it's pretty amazing.
Great. Now, what are the predominant features or types of bats in this area?
Well, most of the bats, they range from the little browns, which have a wingspan of about 8.5 inches, all the way up to the, did you care to see a picture of those?
Let's take a look at the big poster here first, if we could.
Okay.
And that gives us an idea of what the bats look like sort of in the region.
For the
Then we'll
Great
look at
Lakes area.
Yeah, and then we'll take a look a bit more closely at some of these. And we've got an opportunity for those who are interested in bats in just a few days to go and take a look at this material more closely and to hear a good course. Okay, so what are the distinguishing features of the bats in this area?
Well, the little browns are the ones...
Sure.
Okay, let's see if we can find that picture of the little brown. This is a little brown bat.
All right.
And those are the ones that have been decimated. And so this is what we had the most common bats in this area.
It was the common bat. Okay. Now, are there any of the figures that distinguish this type of bat, little brown, other than its size?
Well, they have short wings. And when a
Okay.
bat has short wings, they're able to be much more of an acrobat.
Right.
Than when they have the long, thin wings, they're more of a long-distance flyer.
Right.
So they could twist and turn and somersault and catch bugs in all different positions. They also have little pointy noses,
Right.
whereas some of the others have a very broad nose.
Right. And how do they find the bugs?
Oh, echolocation. They're
Echolocate.
phenomenal at it.
Okay.
And they're able to make a sound in their throat. It comes up through their mouth. It goes out about 15 feet in a conical space, comes back to their ears. They can tell how big the prey is, how far away it is, and how fast it's moving.
Okay. And so they use that whole nervous system to sort that material out and to understand what the prey is. Now, has there ever been we understand the little browns were the most common type.
They were.
Has there ever been a census of the bat population at Chautauqua Institution?
Well, over the years, we just all assumed that we had a lot of bats. And then in the late 80s, Brock Fenton from York University in Canada sent some of his graduate students down to Chautauqua to do census taking that summer.
Right.
And we had various buildings where we knew the bats were living in the attic. And so we would set up traps, and when the bats came out, we would capture them, we would study them. We could tell if they were pregnant, we could tell if they were a teenager by the way the bone formation was. And we did numbers, and we figured at that point between the late 80s and the early 90s that Chautauqua probably had about 10,000 bats.
Right. Now, was there a subsequent census after that early 2000?
No, I think that was the primary one where we got the numbers and where we guesstimated what they were.
Okay. And so this would be before we'll talk about this fungal infection in just a few minutes, but this was before then, so it becomes a fair baseline,
Yes.
doesn't it, to us to talk about the situation. Now, can you tell me about the major reduction, that fungal infection, what happened? And we'll need to see some graphics. Let's talk it through, and then let's take a look at some graphics.
Okay. This is what the white nose fungus looks like.
Okay.
It was brought over from Europe.
How did that happen?
Well, there were caving in Europe who came over and had not cleaned their clothing, and they had the fungus on their clothing, and when they went into Howe Caverns near Albany, New York, they spread the fungus, and within 2 years had pretty much decimated the cave.
Right.
So that shows you what it looks like, and this is what happens to their wings when
That's
the
what
fungus
happens
eats
to the
away at the
wing.
tissue.
Okay. So can you talk me through a little greater detail how the bats are lost with the fungus?
Well, the fungus is very similar to athlete's foot.
Okay.
And for those people who've had athlete's foot, it's an irritant and it starts eating away at the skin, and that's what was happening with their tissue. The fungus would eat away at the tissue, and when bats hibernate, they eat a huge amount of food before they go into the cave to hibernate, and that amount of body fat that they put on is supposed to take them through the winter.
Right.
Every time a bat wakes up, it burns body fat because they're in a state of torpor, and when they bring all their processes up to full bore, they burn the body fat. And so if it's done several times through the winter and they burn all of their body fat off, they come out in the middle of winter looking for food, and they starve to death or they freeze to death. And so huge numbers have been lost, like 6 million bats and counting.
Okay. Now, there was a number that was significant within 2 years after the infection of this fungus. How many bats were lost by the estimates?
They're guessing 6 million and counting.
6 million.
So it started in New York, it moved up into Canada, it moved down the eastern seaboard, it moved into Kentucky, Tennessee, Oklahoma, and we're quite worried that when it comes into New Mexico or Arizona that we're going to have a big problem.
Okay. And can you give us a demonstration? You have it right in front of you there, showing what the population used to look like.
Oh, isn't that gorgeous?
And what is that?
Those are all little browns.
And where was this thing?
This is in Ripley, New York.
Ripley.
Yes.
Okay.
It was a man's barn.
Okay.
And he wanted to exclude the bats from the inside of his barn, so he did that. He put up 7 bat houses, and we used to take field trips out there, and we counted as many as 1,900 bats.
1,900 bats.
Last year it was down to 12, and this year it's down to 30.
My goodness.
So that's how serious the problem has been.
Now, how far apart are those shells that are shown in your photo?
Oh, 3/4 of an inch.
3/4 of an
Little
inch.
brown bats like it nice and tight and cozy and warm and snuggly.
And so that means they get in with their buddies and an efficient way to store, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's also an efficient way to share the fungus because when they hibernate, they're all nice and close together.
Indeed.
And it goes from bat to bat to bat.
Right through there. Right
This
through
is a picture of the barn where we used to go, and
Okay. And so you would sit outside the bat house.
and we would
then-
count.
And then count those. Okay. And so that was a horrific sort of loss. Now, how did this happen that they came from Europe with this clothing? They infected the American bats, but it seems like the European bats were not affected by the fungus.
That's true. The bats in Europe grew up with the fungus,
Okay.
and our bats had never been subjected to it, so they had no immunity. And the other thing is when they're hibernating, their immune system is depressed.
Okay.
And so it just wiped right through like a scourge.
Right. Now, do the European bats hibernate also? They have the same thing.
But they do have resistance to it, and ours don't.
Sort of the residual immunity that they acquire from early on. And do the Europeans have pretty much the same type of bats as we do?
Some similar, not exactly the same as what we have.
But indeed, it was that immunity that was passed that kept the infection from devastating the European populations. Now, has anything been done to develop a treatment for this fungus?
Well, we've not been very successful at figuring out a treatment. This has been really decimating to the populations. They did have success in Hannibal, Missouri in 2015. They had a group of bats that had the white nose fungus, and they discovered that a common organic compound that gives off volatile organic into the air was very successful in stopping bananas from ripening, going from green to black practically overnight. So a graduate student got the idea, why wouldn't this work for bats? And so they took these 75 bats that already had the white nose fungus, they put them in a controlled environment, they put this compound in a petri dish, and being in the proximity of the bats while they were hibernating through the winter, they came out in the spring and none of them had the fungus.
Okay.
So the dilemma is, okay, so if you put that in a cave, how does it affect all the other creatures that live in the cave? You know, we can't be willy-nilly about charging in, but it is the first successful thing that we've had.
Right. So that was 2015, and I hope that research continues to be funded so there are subsequent tests for some material. Now, what other type, if one is smart about bats, what other types of bats should you learn about besides those that we have here? And I know we have some graphics here that show different sizes.
Well, these are the different wingspans of the bats that live here.
Okay.
And some of them, they go all the way up to 14 inches.
Really?
And so people have been commenting lately about some of the bats they've seen look really huge.
Right.
Well, these are tree bats.
Okay.
And the tree bats are not affected by the fungus. The tree bats migrate instead of hibernating.
Okay.
And so you have the variation from the little tiny wings all the way down to the 14-inch wings.
Okay, and your wings at the top are labeled as being 8 to 10 inches, down to 14 inches, so that's a big difference. Now, if they migrate, where do they go?
Generally the Carolinas.
Okay.
Now, it's something you may not be aware of is the Athenaeum Hotel has bat cutouts in all of the railings.
The railings, huh?
Isn't that neat? A lot of people don't notice that, and then when they do, they're pretty blown away that they're actually bat carvings.
I could tell you some stories about that. I need to go. Your photograph is slipping loose here.
Oh, sorry.
I could tell you some stories about that set of stairways, and remember not too long ago we had saw a picture when Bill Clinton was here. They had his whole crew out there for a picture with the staff of the hotel, so the one record shot for everybody, so they wouldn't be taking pictures of the president throughout the visit.
He may not have even noticed that those were bat carvings.
Probably they didn't. Probably they didn't. Okay. Have those bat carvings always been there, or are they new?
No, they've been there a very, very long time.
Great.
Which is just, you know, for those who are observant, it's wonderful.
Now, we have these types of bats, and tell me about the migration of vampire bats. I understand that's somewhat of a different issue. We talked about that earlier. And then there will be somebody who will ask, and what do vampire bats do, and what's the concern?
You really want to go there?
Absolutely.
All right.
We're there.
Okay. Vampire bats live in South America, Central America, Mexico, and I had a gentleman at my bat chat about 7 years ago who said they've moved into the tip of Texas.
Okay.
Vampire bats survive on protein, and the protein is gleaned from the blood in the animals. Vampire bats, that's primarily the only thing that they eat.
Okay.
And the ranchers don't like them because they will go back to the same wound where they have fed the night before, and they will feed again.
Okay.
The wound will get infected. Sometimes the livestock dies. And so they're not very popular with cattlemen.
Right, and the cattlemen really want to destroy them, don't they, if they can?
Yeah, and sometimes they go into caves and dynamite caves with the intention of killing the vampires, and they kill a whole bunch of good bat species. And so education is absolutely critical.
Right. Now, many of us have looked at bat pictures on labels, and we haven't even been aware of it. And some beverages that we look at make use of the bat picture.
Okay, you ready for this?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, how many of you know what beverage uses the bat as its logo? Ta-da!
There we go. Okay.
And so the story goes, when Bacardi was started in the 1800s, 1862 to be exact, a lot of people couldn't read or write. And Bacardi wanted to make absolutely sure that they got their rum and not somebody else's. So they figured, we're going to put a bat as our logo. Nobody else had taken that particular logo. And so for years now, every Bacardi bottle you look at, there's a little tiny bat on the top of it.
Really, really. Now, a year ago, I shot some video of the original Bacardi distillery in Santiago de Cuba. So after this is through, I got to go back and see if there are still any bats that are recognizable in that
I would imagine there probably are.
They have a big office building in Havana, and then the distillery out in Santiago.
Well, for the rum drinkers, it's awesome.
It's awesome. That's terrific. That's terrific, huh? Okay, now we understand then bats have been part of our culture, and people tend to get fearful of bats. Is that in this country, in this region, is that justified?
No. No, the one thing you do have to be careful of, any animal that's behaving strangely, you have to assume that it might be ill and you back away from it. And that would go for raccoons or cats or dogs or bats. If they're behaving strangely, it's best to leave them alone.
Give it some distance.
But generally the numbers of bats are not real high.
Right.
And so
that's it. Now, people tend to be fearful of bats. You're telling me that's not particularly justified. And what changes in home maintenance have affected the size of the bat population? I'm thinking particularly Chautauqua Institution.
At Chautauqua, decades ago, everybody's attic was open. The bats had access to it. It was warm, it was cozy, it smelled like home. They had no trouble getting in and out because a bat only needs about a ½ an inch space for it to come in. And then over the years, as families enlarged, people wanted to finish off their attics. And so the first thing they wanted to do was exclude the bats. And so when they did that, the bats had to find another place to live. And oftentimes they don't move next door, they may go down the lake as far, away from the institution. So we would lose those bats. The other thing is we have tree bats. We have house bats and tree bats. And the tree bats are losing their habitats because so many of the great big trees in Chautauqua are being taken down for safety purposes, but nonetheless that nice gnarly bark with the big spaces behind it is exactly where a tree bat would like to hide and set up housekeeping, so to speak.
Right. I remember some years ago sitting outside a cottage owned by a family member in the Chautauqua Institution, and the dealer was come out and set up some chairs, and right as light transitioned from dusk to darkness, end of that period, we counted 100 bats coming out of that cottage, and another generation got the cottage, and guess what they did? They went at it with some caulking guns, and that was the end of that consequence.
And the amphitheater had over 300 bats at one point in time.
It did.
And we could sit in the bleachers and see them coming out, and it was just amazing.
And that was part of the milieu of coming to Chautauqua.
It was the joy of it.
Living with the bats.
Now you mentioned the little browns. This is the bat that will most likely take over the role of the little browns. This is a big brown bat.
That's the big brown.
They are larger, they have a bigger wingspan, they have a stronger constitution. They will live in houses and they will live in bat houses.
Okay.
So, but bats only have one pup a year.
Okay.
And so when the reproduction is as slow as that, we're not going to get the kind of colonies that we had with the little browns.
Right.
And this is what a good bat house should look like.
Okay. So let me ask a question about bat houses. For many years, people were encouraged to build bat houses, and we don't hear much discussion of that anymore, much advice about building bat houses. Can you give us a few pointers about the process and whether it's appropriate, and should people still think of that?
Sure. When you build a large bat house, your intention is of accommodating moms and babies, moms and pups, because they hibernate in the summer. I mean, they hang out in the summer together. The males are off doing their own thing. So if you want a large colony of females and pups, then you need the larger bat houses. If you go to Home Depot and you get a tiny little bat house that's only about that wide, you're probably going to get only a single male bat in it. What I tell people is, whatever part of the country you're from, if you want to put a bat house up, make sure that there are bats in your area that are going to move into that bat house, or you're going to be disappointed. So your best resource is the Game and Fish or Wildlife and Fish organization. Ask them if there are bats left in your area, and if those are the bats that would live in your bat house as opposed to living in a tree.
Right. And what side of the house should the bat house be put
Bat
in?
house should face east because the bats want the warm morning sun.
Okay.
Southeast, south. Never do west because it gets way too hot. This summer would have been a real challenge for them.
Right.
And on the north, it never gets sunshine, so you don't want to put it on the north.
Okay.
You want it on a 15-foot pole. You want it away from a tree. You never put it on a wooden pole or a telephone pole or a tree, because first off, the tree provides shade and the bats want it to be warm and toasty in there, like 102 degrees.
Right.
And you don't want anything that a critter can climb up and bother the bats.
Got it.
So metal pole, or on the side of a house or the side of a barn.
Okay.
Those are perfect locations.
Perfect location. The southeastern side or something would do just perfect. Okay. And the pretty good size then is significant. Now, what do you encourage people to do when they're remodeling a house to promote the growth of bats?
Well, there is one house in Chautauqua where they specifically wanted bats, and when they remodeled the attic, they cordoned off a section of it so that the bats can't get into the rest of the attic. They're only in one small portion. And they had big browns living in there, which was pretty exciting. Other things that people can do if they want to coexist with the bats is to lay down a very heavy layer of plastic, like Visqueen, and the bat droppings and urine will fall down on that at the end of the summer. You roll it up, you discard it, or you wash it off and lay it down again for the next year. So you could coexist with the bats if you wanted to continue to give them a home.
Right. And that would be like an old cottage that's up high. A side facing to the southeast would be the preferred.
Well, the bats are clever. They'll go into the attic and they'll find the warmest part.
They will.
They'll either go to the apex, or they'll find the warmest wall where they can stay good and toasty.
Right. Now, some folks have told us some advice what you should do if a bat gets into your house.
Oh, so glad you asked.
Indeed.
This is my special bat rescue kit, and it's got very high-tech things in it, like a piece of cardboard from a small legal pad, a deli container, which everybody has one of those in their house, and I've punched little holes in the top, and a tiny towel because it's a tiny bat and it doesn't need a beach towel. And then I show up with gloves because that's a safety factor, and I show up with a flashlight because they sometimes hide under furniture, and I show up with a pencil just in case they get wedged behind something and I need to prod them out. So the first thing you want to do is to give the bat a choice to go out on its own. So if it's in a room, close the door to the rest of the house, open the windows or doors to the outside, and let the bat go out on its own, because it's thirsty. After it's been sleeping all day, it wants a drink of water. So it wants to get out of that house.
How will it find the door?
Oh, well, when you open the door, the bats have a tragus in their ears, and it's got little fine hairs on it, and they can feel the wind movement coming around. And the one I had in my house, it took him 3 passes, and out the door he went.
Okay.
So these now, if he doesn't go out by himself, and you now need for him to find a new location, you find your deli container, because these are, everybody has these in their house, and you wait for him to get tired.
Okay.
And he will land somewhere, hopefully not on the ceiling. And when he does, he's tired now, so you're pretty good. You go over and you put that over him, and you slide the cardboard gently underneath. And the reason you use a clear container is because you can see what you're doing. If you use a ceramic bowl or a coffee can, you can injure the bat, and you don't even realize you're injuring it. So that's what I use, is the clear deli container. Once I have the bat, I take it outside, I find a tree, I put this up as high on the tree as I can, I slide the cardboard out, I give the bat a minute to get a grip on the tree, then I take that away, and then he'll either climb up and go to sleep, or he'll fly away and go do his thing for the evening. So this is a very easy way to capture them, as opposed to tennis racket, golf club, baseball bat, broom, none of those are acceptable. This is a tiny little creature.
And the plastic is no cost.
Yeah.
Now, what do you use the pencil for?
Well,
Part of your kit.
a year or so ago, I did a rescue, maybe 3 years ago, and there was a big drain pipe on the side, one of those old Chautauqua second floors, and that bat wedged himself behind that drain pipe, and we could not get in and get him to move. So I found the pencil, and I just prodded him gently, and then I was able to put the container over him. So
Okay.
high tech, very high tech.
Very high tech. and the way it goes. Now, you have a cover in your container there with holes in it.
Yes.
What's the purpose of this? Obviously, you're not going to catch the bat with the cover on.
No. So when I capture the bat, I put the cover over it,
Okay.
and I'll walk around the neighborhood if it's during the day, and I will introduce the bat to everybody within range. Because when people see how cute they are, it erases the fear factor. And I had one little bat, it was a big brown bat, and he had his little foot up through there, and he turned around, he went to sleep.
Goodness.
So he just got so bored with the whole process.
Goodness.
So everybody has one of these, and they're simple.
Goodness. Now, if somebody is really interested in bats, and what can they do soon to find out more about bats?
Well, we have this wonderful festival coming up. This is at the Greystone Preserve. This is out near Fredonia, and we are bringing in Merlin Tuttle. Merlin Tuttle is one of the top bat experts on the planet. He started Bat Conservation International, and he has traveled all over the world to educate countries about taking care of bats, about how to preserve them. He's taken phenomenal photographs of bats. The best photos I've ever seen were taken by Merlin. So he is coming to grace our presence. He will be doing the main speech that day at this Bat Festival, which is on Saturday, August 27th, from noon until midnight, because they're planning on going out and catching some bats and studying them. That's why it goes till midnight.
And let me read the address here. It's Greystone Nature Preserve, 531 Bear Lake Road in Fredonia, and they give us a phone number, 716-792-7899. So indeed, we have a wonderful opportunity for everybody to learn substantially more about bats, and it's wonderful that here it is at the end of the season as kids get ready to go back to school, so they have some new information.
And this is something they intend to do every year,
That's terrific.
probably closer to the middle of the summer.
That's terrific. That's terrific. Carolyn, what have we missed? Anything we need to cover?
Well, gosh, I think we got,
We're running very close on time. Let's take a
Okay.
look. Last items we need to.
well, this is a nice book that was put out by the Arkansas Game and Fish Department.
Goodness.
It has bats of the United States. Of the 1,300 species in the world, only 45 of them are in North America.
Really?
And the states that have the most are California with 32, Arizona with 28, and Texas with 36 species.
Goodness.
Here we only have 9 species.
Okay.
So this is out of print, but I would imagine with people who are diligent, they might be able to find a copy. It goes into every bat that's in the United States, shows what their range is and what they look like and characteristics defining the bats.
So it's an immensely authoritative book. Again, Bats of the United States by Michael Harvey. Carolyn, we're out of time. And this has been lots of fun. And I hope you'll come back to Chautauqua People. And let's come back after you've had a chance to visit to the program here in Fredonia.
I look forward to it.
Great.
Thank you, John.
By
I
all
appreciate
means.
it.
Indeed.